Okay, so I wanted to look at ethics today. Like I said, people don't seem to talk about it very much in Western Dharma. I heard once, in the days when it was all on tapes in the Gaia House library, his teacher saying that he went to look for a talk on ethics in the Gaia House tape library of talks, and he couldn't find a single one. Which is slightly surprising, particularly given that in Asian Dharma this is seen as really foundational, and in fact some teachers will not teach you meditation unless you have been practicing these 5 precepts, which I'll go through in a minute, for at least a year. So that's how foundational they think it is. Now, I have to say that when I first learned to meditate, if I'd turned up at the centre and they said, well, have you been practicing your precepts, your ethics for at least a year, I probably would have never learned to meditate. That would have felt like a really, just very dictatorial. It would have felt like a real massive imposition. So that is, our difference of culture, of course. And Ajahn Chah, the great Thai teacher who brought very much the Thai forest tradition to the West, noticed this same thing as well. He said Westerners are not so keen to engage with ethics, with morality. They'll get really into meditation, and then the importance of morality will come to them later. And he thought that was fine. So I'm glad that that he thought that what happened was fine. And I see this with a lot of people. But this is often described as the threefold way. So ethics, sila, samadhi, concentration, focus, and panya, wisdom. And ethics are really there as our foundation. So sooner or later, we do need to look at this. It may not be where we start, but we do need to look at it and bring it into our lives. So I'll just run through the basic 5 precepts. Some of you will be really familiar with this. And I want to look at how we approach this and also ways of kind of extending the original 5 precepts. So the first is not to kill or harm any living being. Hang on, I'm going to sneeze. No, I'm not. Not to kill or harm any living being. Not taking what's not given to us. So basically not stealing. Not engaging in sexual misconduct. Not lying or gossiping, so right speech, not engaging in harmful speech, and also not taking intoxicating drugs. And these are, you think, well, this is all sort of fairly obvious stuff for how we live together, though of course not all spiritual traditions would have all of these, intoxicating drugs. Some religious traditions don't think that's a problem. Hinduism definitely does. So often in our sort of Western cultural sort of idea is that being ethical or being moral is sort of boring in some way, or it's like an imposition, or it's a sort of dull should thing, but actually it's much more fun to be a bit naughty. But the Buddha is looking at it in really a different way, and he's saying actually a life lived ethically in accordance with these 5 precepts, and monastics have a lot more precepts. There are also other precepts for lay people, but these are like our foundation ones. This should be a life of joy. This is a fulfilling life to live ethically. So I've got I was doing some research on this, and I looked on Access to Insight, and I'll put a link to the page that I found, because it had some really good sutta quotes. And there's one here, I'll just read you a little extract. The rewards of virtue. So it's Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, is asking him, what, O Venerable One, is the reward and blessing of wholesome morality? And the Buddha says, freedom from remorse, Ananda. So freedom from remorse, freedom from regret and thinking, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. Oh God, I wonder if they know that I stole that. And Ananda says, and what is the reward and blessing of freedom from remorse? And the Buddha replies, joy, Ananda. And it carries on through the 7 factors of enlightenment, of joy, of rapture, tranquility, happiness, concentration, and ultimately liberation of deliverance. And so right at the bottom of this is our foundation of wholesome morality, doing good things, not doing bad things. So the Buddha's pointing out that this is a life of joy. This is not a life that's somehow sort of lacking and missing anything. This is actually a good life. And if you're going to engage in meditation, it's quite difficult to allow the mind to settle if you're full of regrets. If you're thinking, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. Oh, I wonder if anyone will ever find out that I did that. the mind doesn't settle, it kind of goes over this kind of stuff. So it's much easier to feel a sense of calm and a sense of joy and a sense of sort of integrity and self-respect when we're living an ethical life. We kind of know what's right, really, I think. None of these precepts are ones that many people turn around and say, oh, well, that's just ridiculous, I'm not doing that. So the other way to look at it is that to break these precepts, to kill or to harm or to steal or to say bad things or to have affairs with people, this is going to be rooted in one of the poisons of the mind. So this is quite a strong word. There's other even stronger ones like defilements, translation of the Pali word kilesa. And classically this is greed, wanting stuff. So, say I'm out for my walk and I see a nice plant outside someone's house. I think, oh, that's nice. I'll have that. That's greed. If I give in to that, I'm just reinforcing my habit of greed. Much nicer to appreciate it and say, oh, that's nice, I like that flowering plant. Do some appreciative joy, perhaps. That's a wholesome thing, rather than, I'm going to steal that. So you can see how to give in to that greed would be breaking a precept, how they're kind of the same thing. Similarly, if I was going to go off and have an affair, that would also be, that would be greed for sensual pleasure. And it would cause all kinds of chaos and hurt. So, there's really not very much temptation for that. Similarly, to say nasty things to someone or to hurt another person, this is coming from ill will. That's the next poison. Greed, hatred, ill will. We can't say something horrible to someone if we haven't got that sense of ill will towards them. We can't hurt them unless there's a sense of ill will. Okay, so just an example. So to keep to the precepts means that we will be kind of protecting ourselves from our worst impulses, the ones coming from the poisons of the mind, the greed and the ill will. And also the third one of these is delusion, or not seeing clearly, and it's really delusory to think you're going to get away with this somehow. You might not be caught by the police, sure, but you will know. You will pay a price for doing this. You will pay a price. When I first took these precepts at Plum Village quite a few years ago, I remember the nun there who gave them to me described them as like an umbrella, like a protection. And that's really stayed with me. If I commit to not doing this, that's not to say I'll never slip up, because like we all do, okay, particularly right speech, but it's a protection. I've committed. I'm not going to be this kind of person. I'm not going to be that person who nicks people's plants from their garden, for example. And it protects me from bad behaviour. It protects me from giving into those impulses. It's a commitment. This is what I'm going to do. So really, a life lived in ethics, I hope you can see, is a life keeping us from our worst impulses. So it's really good for us. Okay, ethics are often thought of in the West as, oh, we're doing it for someone else. And that's an aspect, but it is also for us, okay, for our own practice. But of course it is also about others. All of them are relational. All of them are relational. Apart from possibly the intoxicating drugs one, but actually that will also be relational, because we're always relational. So another little quote here, and I will pop the link in the chat. There is the case where a disciple of the noble ones, abandoning the taking of life and abstaining from taking life. In doing so, he gives freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression, to limitless numbers of beings. So this is for the others. In giving freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, freedom from oppression to limitless numbers of beings, he gains a share in limitless freedom from danger, freedom from animosity, and freedom from oppression. So we're not separate, is what he's saying. By giving this to another, you are also gaining a share. It also impacts on you as well. So this applies to all of them, of course. All of them. We are relational. So I'd encourage you to look at ethics as not just for others, but also for you, and notice how much better you feel when you act in an ethical way. So normally the precepts are framed as refraining from. I undertake the training rule to refrain from, is how it's often formulated, certainly in my tradition. But When I was at Plum Village, I looked at how Thich Nhat Hanh has formulated these precepts, and I'll put a link into that as well. And he has really gone above and beyond with this. He's extended them in a way that I think is really relevant for our modern world. Things have changed enormously since the time of the Buddha, and we often don't see the direct results of our actions, but they are having effects. I'm sure this is not news to you. So I'll just go through what he says, because I think it's really, really worth looking at. They're quite long, so I'm not going to read all of them, but I'm just going to give a little brief synopsis and a bit of discussion. So the first one, not to kill. I mean, probably none of you going out and killing, I'm imagining. But he's saying to extend that and to think about our other actions. Maybe we don't know the impact of our actions, but maybe we can inform ourselves and then refrain from actions that contribute to violence to others. So, for example, I used to, at the end of my mindfulness courses, I used to give people little semi-precious gems, and, you know, I've got a certain amount of jewellery, for example, made out of gold and silver and jewels and things. And then I read a couple of years ago an article in The Guardian about how these things are produced, particularly gemstones. It was absolutely appalling how these beautiful things are produced in mines with no safety standards. I mean, mines are always dangerous, but third world mines are really dangerous. And it's often children getting these things out of the ground. They're not being paid very much. And I was just so appalled to hear about this. You know, another example is in Mexico, a lot of silver comes from Mexico, and most of the miners don't live beyond 50 because their lungs are so destroyed by the quality of the air and the dust in the mines that they die at 50. I mean, this is just appalling, right, for us to have some pretty earrings or a nice ring. So at that time I thought, right, I just can't buy any more of this kind of stuff. You know, I have enough. I really do. I've got some nice jewellery, that's great. I don't need any more. So this is just an example. You may have your own examples that you know about, or maybe you're thinking, goodness, I want to inform myself. And there's so many. And now that our world is so much more interconnected, we often are not seeing the impact of our actions in a way that the Buddha would have seen it much more closely, much more immediately, the impact of actions. And phone materials as well, of course. A lot of them come from really unsavoury conditions and mines, and, you know, you can go and research this kind of stuff, and possibly a lot of you already have. And to go even further with this precept is to be proactive, so refraining from some things and maybe also protecting others in some ways. Is there a way we can protect another from violence, from actual physical harm? You know, I'm sure you can think of your own ways of doing that. You know, campaigning against war, for example, that kind of thing. So refraining from directly hurting others, but also looking at how our wider actions do impact on other people. And, you know, we can't be perfect, so please don't beat yourself up for trying to be for failing to be perfect. We can't be. We really can't be. You know, and the world is really tipped in favour of course, of disposable and high consumption, and that's made very easy for us. But just to be trying makes me feel like at least I'm trying. The second one, not to take what's not given. Well, I'm going to make a massive assumption that none of you are breaking into your neighbours' houses and shoplifting. If you are, then I'd suggest maybe not doing that. But also looking as well at, is there anything I'm taking that maybe I actually don't need? You know, and again, this is very different to the Buddha's time. You know, there are now 7 billion of us. We can't carry on at this level of consumption. I'm sure you know this already. Could we maybe just think of that as, even if we do have the legal right to everything that we own, we bought it, we didn't steal it, but have I actually got more than my share here? Perhaps I don't need as much. Maybe I've got enough clothes. I decided at the beginning of last year not to buy any more clothes. I looked at my wardrobe, I thought, I've got enough, actually. I don't need any more. It might be fun to have more clothes, but I do not need any more. And all of these things have a cost. You know, so maybe some of you are already thinking along these lines. And another thing, of course, and again, it is more expensive, and this is possible, of course, for some of you and maybe not for others, but a lot of our food is produced in hideous conditions, and the people growing it, making it, are not paid enough. So maybe you can afford fair trade coffee, tea, bananas, that kind of stuff. You know, so that's some kind of equal exchange for their work that we get our treats of tea and coffee. And for those of you who can't do that, you know, fair enough, I completely understand. So it's like, look at what's possible for us. And it should feel like a joyful thing. When I buy fair trade tea and I maybe think of the people picking the tea, I think, yeah, I hope you're having a better life from me making this choice. And that's a joyful thing. I feel good about that, actually. So yeah, sexual misconduct. And so this is understood in lots of different ways. In classical Asian schools, they would say no sex before marriage. Probably that would be unusual here to think that, though maybe you do. That's fine as well. I think the kernel here is just not causing harm with sexuality. And that's not just, actual intercourse, whether it's straight or gay or whatever. As far as I know, the Buddha said absolutely nothing about sexuality. One way or the other, or both, or whatever. I don't think he said anything about that. What he was highlighting was that sexuality is it's a very strong force, and to be careful with it, and not to harm others with our sexuality. So there's obvious things, not being violent with it. Well, that's obvious. Not being unfaithful if your partner is not happy with that. That's kind of obvious. But also smaller things, maybe like not flirting with someone. That if you're in a relationship, not flirting with someone else, it might be fun. Sure, it's fun, but it's hurtful potentially. Not entertaining fantasies about someone else. So respecting the relationship you're in, if you are in a relationship, and respecting other people's relationships as well. And, to go the sort of going above and beyond, maybe protecting others from harm in this way. Is there something we can do to protect others? I'm sure it's not news to you that there's a lot of sexual abuse of various kinds out there. Children, some men, largely women, experience this. And as I was writing this talk, I remembered something that happened 25 years ago now. My boyfriend at the time, lovely, lovely man, told me he'd been cycling home. We were in London. He'd been cycling home from my place to his. It was quite late. And he saw a woman walking and a man approach her, and she looked scared, and he thought, oh, this doesn't look like he's her friend. So what he did is he went over, he was a tall guy, 6'4", he went over to them, and seeing him coming, the other man ran away, and he went over to the woman and said, I saw what happened there, would you like me to accompany you home? I'll make sure you're safe. And it's just so touching that he could see what was happening, and he protected that woman. He protected her probably from some unsavoury thing happening that she didn't want. We'll never know for sure, but that was a really beautiful thing to do. And even 25 years later, I remember that. And as a woman, I've experienced, various kinds of unwanted sexual attention. And it's really helpful if a man steps in and says, please, guys, if you just don't do it. I'm sure none of you do, but, it's really helpful to protect others from this kind of thing. Really helpful. Male, female, child, adult. We can protect each other in this way. So the fourth one, right speech. Now this is often the hardest one because words come out so quickly. So this is where mindfulness can really help us. Mindfulness, what is my mental state now? Am I feeling full of kindness for this person, in which case probably my words will come out sweetly? Or am I actually in a bit of a bad mood? Am I even angry with them, in which case they're likely to come out not so well? And mindfulness will help us with all of the precepts, but I'd say more with right speech than anything else. So this is usually just formulated as not lying, but I think we need to go beyond that. Maybe your friend looks terrible one day, but does she actually need to know that? Is that actually a kind thing to say? Is it helpful? She just had a haircut and it looks terrible. It's not going to help very much to tell her that. Maybe, find something kinder to say. If she's looking ill, maybe you can say, oh, you're all right. You're not, can I help at all? So there's another set of criteria. So is it true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? Is this the right person to say this to? And is it the right time? You can probably think of when someone's raised something difficult with you, when you were just trying to leave the door, you were just going into a meeting, or, you were just going to bed and you just really didn't want to think about it now. So really trying to find the most appropriate way to speak. And if you are feeling upset or angry, maybe this just isn't the time to say this. And you need to kind of simmer down. Thich Nhat Hanh talks a lot about this. Waiting till you're not upset to say the difficult things. And this is a great thing actually with email and writing and letters. You can sit on it for a while. I had a really difficult email to write, and it took me weeks to think, what do I actually really want to say here? Where I say what I want to say, but in a skillful way. So, right speech is huge. And the other side of this, which I don't think is in the suttas, is compassionate listening. When one person is speaking, hopefully someone else is listening. And Thich Nhat Hanh talks about this. Deep listening to another person is a real act of kindness and generosity for them. And the other aspect of this, of course, is not spreading lies. So not lying ourselves, but making sure that anything that we pass on, we are really sure it's true. And sometimes I find myself saying, well, I'm not sure this is true, but this is what I read. As I understand, it's like this. There's a lot we don't know, right? And we get very sure about things. And that way lies discord and conflict generally. So just sort of saying, well, I think it's like this. I was reading the other day, it's like this, but, maybe there's some other facts out there that I'm not aware of. They usually are. They usually are. And the fifth one, again, usually formulated as not having any intoxicating drugs. And again, there's lots of different interpretations of this. A sort of hardline monastic view is absolutely nothing ever. Other people like me think, well, the odd glass of wine, the odd beer, not a big deal. But I do find, though, that even just with one glass of wine, my mindfulness becomes more difficult to maintain. I don't lose it, actually. It becomes more difficult to maintain, though. And I don't really want that much. Actually, the attraction of, getting out of it is zero. And if I'd been told this before I started practicing, you can't do this, it would have felt really an imposition. But now the interest is just not there. But I think more interesting, and again, this is about our modern day and not didn't really apply in the Buddha's times, looking at what else we're taking in. Okay, what else are we taking in? So I remember when I was on the way back from Plum Village on a French train. No, it was an English train. I cycled from Plum Village, train in England, that's it. I was on the train in England. I was too scared to cycle on the A roads from Southampton. And I saw a copy, I think, of Cosmopolitan on the table. And I was kind of attracted to the pretty pictures, and I just thought, no, that magazine just makes me feel really inadequate. I don't look good enough, my job isn't good enough, my house isn't good enough. And I left it there. And it was a real, this was a long time ago now. But it really stayed with me. And this is the reflection. What are we taking in? What are we reading? What are we listening to? And goodness, that was over 20 years ago. How the world has changed since then. We can spend our entire lives browsing the internet and reading stuff, listening to stuff. Being really careful about what you're taking in. What is useful, what is true, what effect is it having on me? It's not for anyone else to say. Some people may decide that I'm just not going to watch the news now, it's too upsetting. For me, I feel I want to stay informed, but, like in a limited way, beginning and end of the day or something. When BBC has stories from people talking about their losses, and they're in tears on national television, I salute their bravery at being happy to do this, but it's just too upsetting for me. I don't need convincing. I know why it's there. I don't need convincing. I am convinced already. For me, that's just too upsetting to watch. So really just to look at what is nourishing us, what is helpful for us to take in. And when it's time to just turn the computer off and, have a cup of tea, play with the cat, talk to your friend or whatever. So I'll just pop these other links in the chat. It was the one from Access to Insights with the Buddhist quotes and also the Thich Nhat Hanh stuff, which I think is really, really interesting to look at. So just to kind of summarise, and this is just, it's not me telling you what to do, it's just stuff to think about, to consider, really to start looking at your sort of ethical choices, which we're all making all the time, as a source of joy. How can I be the best person I want to be? That's how I think of it. How can I be the person I really want to be, not the person dragged around perhaps by impulses to, do slightly less skillful things. That's always there as an option, but how can I be the best person? And knowing this will ripple out. Even if you don't see it, it will ripple out. Every box of fair trade tea does make a little difference. Every act of generosity or protection for another does make a difference. And you can know that. They even have a practice, and again, this is right there in the suttas, and they do it in some Buddhist countries, of reflecting on your own good deeds. It's a good way of feeling good about yourself. It might just be small things. Maybe you just fed the cat, but just reflecting on your own good deeds. It's a good way of feeling good about yourself. And I'm sure you all have done good things. I'm sure you have. Yeah, so this is a great support for practice. I want to move into some practice now. So, how are we for time? Okay, so what I want to do now is about half an hour of guided practice.